There's a guy named Jerry Coyne. Apparently, I'm unfamiliar, but he posted an article on FFRF's website, I think, that was super anti-trans, and FFRF got like a ton of pushback, and it's been really ugly. So I want to talk about this whole situation. Let me break it down for you. This is on Hemant Mehta's website, Friendly Atheist, written by Hemant Mehta, December 28th, 2024. Let's give this a read. Atheist group faces backlash after publishing and then removing anti-trans article. Here's an update from 12/29. Jerry Coyne, Steven Pinker, and Richard Dawkins have all resigned from the FFRF honorary board. Good riddance. It's always nice when the trash takes itself out. I urge FFRF to replace them with people who advance their cause instead of setting it back. Okay. Unfortunately, I have to say Richard Dawkins is like really rabidly anti-trans right now, and I don't understand why, but all right. Somehow, in the span of about 24 hours, the FFRF made an egregious mistake, got plenty of well-deserved backlash for it, then quickly attempted to correct the problem. And you can bet they'll get plenty of undeserved backlash for trying to fix the error. If you have no clue what I'm talking about, congratulations on having a life outside the internet. I will be asking you for advice later. This whole controversy dates back to a post on FFRF's Free Thought Now blog. Free Thought Now is the site where some FFRF staffers, lawyers, and interns elaborate on the group's work. Recent articles focus on topics like Christian nationalism and feminism. It's nothing that would surprise their supporters. In early November, former FFRF intern Kat Grant posted an article about how much of our society's views on gender are steeped in religious traditions. Quote, missionaries often view gender systems outside of the strict sexual binary to be a mark of a less civilized nation, and imposed views of both gender and presentation, such as forcing boys in residential schools to cut their hair, onto the indigenous communities. Interesting. Grant went on to say that those fears are still in play today through right-wing groups, trans-exclusionary radical feminists, or TERFs, and others, but such views disregard both medical science and lived experience, quote-unquote. Grant concludes, I'm not non-binary because I don't identify with femininity. I am non-binary because no particular gender matches my internal sense of self at all. All of this is to say that there is an answer to the question, what is a woman? A woman is whoever she says she is. It seemed like a perfectly fine essay to me, says Hemant Mehta. It wasn't out of place for FFRF to publish it because it focused on the harm religion has played in our view of trans people, and Grant had worked with FFRF as a legal fellow. What is a legal fellow? Do you know what a legal fellow is? It's kind of like a law clerk, okay. Low-level legal worker. Interesting. As far as I can tell, no one publicly complained about the article. Honestly, as with all blog posts these days, it's not clear how many people even saw it. Still, I'm glad Grant wrote it, and I'm glad FFRF posted it, because a lot of prominent atheists, including Richard Dawkins, have been spreading anti-trans propaganda for years now. Yeah, I'm sad to say, like, I read a lot of Richard Dawkins' stuff, and he had a very positive influence on me when I was trying to escape Jehovah's Witnesses. But he's spreading propaganda, like classic run-of-the-mill propaganda that I see coming out of the far right. The same style rhetoric that I find from like Christian communities, like far-right Christian nutcases and stuff. It's wild to me that he recognizes the propaganda from Christian nationalists about atheism, but not about the trans community. Anyway, just really sad. Dawkins has platformed a number of anti-trans activists on his podcast and stage shows, and essentially thinks trans people are cosplaying as a gender they're not. The Center for Inquiry, which merged with Dawkins Foundation, has not criticized any of this, and in fact recently published a lengthy article from CEO Robin Blumner condemning doctors who work with trans children. I hope their malpractice insurance is paid up, Blumner writes. They're going to need it. She expressed those thoughts after accepting, without question, the deeply problematic claims made in the Cass review. Okay, and then it just the paragraph just ends there. Made in the Cass review. Full stop. That's weird. If that's how a legacy secular group is handling trans issues, then we need more atheist organizations defending that community, because the attacks against them often come from religious conservatives and well-known atheists who, for whatever reason, treat gender the same way their ideological opponents treat faith, as something they refuse to change their minds about, no matter what evidence comes their way, because they've invested too much into the lie. That is really disappointing. I'm really sad to see prominent atheists go down this route. Hang on, let me just jump ahead a little bit here. If you believe gender-related issues are tangential to atheism, I assure you that religious conservatives believe the topic is perfectly intertwined with their faith. Just as they used religion to fight marriage equality and abortion rights, they're using the book of Genesis in defense of their anti-trans beliefs. If you don't want religion dictating our laws and you believe LGBTQ people deserve civil rights, then you understand why these are issues atheist activists ought to care about. Yeah, I'll tell you what it looks like right now to me. The whole anti-trans thing, it looks exactly like the Satanic Panic. In fact, it's the same people. It's the same mindset, the same everything. I've been reading about the Satanic Panic recently, and it's identical in every way to the QAnon movement. They're identical. There were claims of satanic people that take advantage of children, say it in a monetizer-friendly way, that are like trying to turn their kids gay and or trans and everything else. All the same stuff from the 1980s about Satanists. So when I hear somebody talking about like trans people, you know, being allowed to compete in this sport and this person won against this cis person, all this, you know what I'm really hearing when I hear people complaining about that? I'm hearing the police officer who produced this Satanic Panic video to try to teach people how to identify satanic rituals when they're off on the job or whatever. That's what I'm hearing. I'll show you what I'm hearing. This is what it sounds like to me when I hear people talking about the trans community and all the damage they're doing and children being surgery and all this other. This is what I think.
Satanism exists in this country as it exists elsewhere. It is appallingly evil. It is about murder. It is about child abuse. It's about sexual abuse. It is no joke and must be taken seriously.
Satanism, no joke, must be taken seriously.
Must be dealt with.
If they can ritually abuse children, if they can in any way abuse children, anything to destroy a child's innocence or their trust or their wonder at the world, they will do it.
The most tragic stories that I've ever heard are where a child has told people what's been happening and the adults have said, don't be stupid, that doesn't happen in this country, you're making up stories, you're lying.
The problem we're coming across is that the higher officials and...
Gotta tell you, man, these glasses and this mustache, top tier. Love it.
These public organizations do not want to acknowledge that this is occurring. We need to lift that veil of misunderstanding and saying, hey, this is a crime to be dealt with. It's the crime of the 90s. It's not going away.
Satanists want to recruit. We know that it's been going on for many years. This is not new, but their arrogance and their outwardness about the way they recruit is becoming unbelievable.
Point is, this is what I think when I hear all this bullshit about trans people taking over and converting people into being gay or whatever the hell they claim about them. It's nonsense. It's always been nonsense. It was nonsense in the 90s when it was coming out about Satanists. It's nonsense today when it's about elite, child abusing, adrenochrome drinking whatevers. And it's nonsense when they talk about trans people being abusers or whatever the hell. It's nonsense. I dismiss it out of hand. I guess I'll look at your evidence or whatever, but you've got a real high burden of proof to prove to me that like satanic child abusers are taking control of the government or that trans people are trying to groom children or whatever the hell. I put it all into the same bucket here. It's just trash. Anyway, let's keep reading here. Some prominent figures in our loose movement, this is Hemant Mehta speaking, has spent years arguing the opposite, allowing white evangelicals to control the debate on LGBT rights and often taking their side. Jerry Coyne, author of Why Evolution is True and Faith versus Fact, Why Science and Religion Are Incompatible, is another one of those atheists who has spent years spreading anti-trans rhetoric on his website. His blog is now mostly a cesspool of block quotes from his favorite conservative writers. A deep dive through his sex and gender posts will rid you of any respect you may have had for him. Coyne gave a similar anti-trans talk at the Center for Inquiry's CSI, SciCon. Oh, wow. SciCon in October. Damn, that's really sad. Dr. Stephen Novella, who spoke at the same event, rebutted it here. This is actually really interesting. Oh my God, I had no idea this was happening. I gotta research this more heavily, and maybe I'll come back to you guys with some info. That's fascinating. Jerry Coyne. Let me see if I can pull up his website. Does he have a website? He's an American biologist and skeptic known for his work on speciation and his commentary on intelligent design. You know, the trans thing isn't really a biological issue. It's a psychological issue. It's a societal thing, kind of a sociology phenomenon. That's not even the right word, but you get what I'm saying. A biologist wouldn't really have much to say about this. It's a psychologist that would have something to say. I was looking for his Jerry Coyne. He is at the University of Chicago, apparently, emeritus. Faith versus fact, why science and religion are incompatible. That's actually a lot of reviews. Interesting. I had no idea that Jerry Coyne was, like, relevant or who he was until now. Huh. Continuing on, this is Hemant Mehta. Coyne, however, also happens to be a member of FFRF's honorary board, a title the group bestows upon distinguished achievers who've made known their dissent from religion. As far as I know, it's a purely symbolic role, but Coyne asked FFRF if he could post a rebuttal to Grant's piece on the group's website, and someone at FFRF gave him the green light. So Grant is, as far as I can tell, a non-binary person who basically described their interpretation of gender then, right? And Coyne wrote a rebuttal to it on FFRF's website. That resulted in a piece published on Thursday called Biology is Not Bigotry, which, unlike other FFRF blog posts, opens with a disclaimer. Quote, "The views in this column are of the author and do not necessarily reflect those of FFRF. That suggests FFRF knew this essay might be problematic but decided to post it anyway. More on that later." Wow, this is actually very long. We'll read it in a second. Let's keep reading Hemant Mehta's breakdown. In the piece, Coyne rehashes the right-wing talking point of how sex is binary. It's not, and dismisses Grant's definition of a woman as a tautology before offering one of his own, a woman is an adult human female, and claims FFRF is stepping out of its lane by even bringing up the topic, despite the barrage of attacks on LGBTQ rights, specifically from religious lawmakers. He seriously says sex and gender have little to do with theism or the First Amendment. Okay, that's stupid. Which, as I mentioned earlier, will come as a shock to anyone who's paid any attention to the anti-LGBT legislation. Some bigots have even used freedom of speech arguments in defense of their refusal to use someone's pronouns. Some bigots. That's like all of them, it seems to me. Like, isn't that like the primary argument? But it gets so much worse, says Hemant Mehta. Coyne says trans women are more likely to be sexual predators based on a stat published by a UK-based hate group focusing only on prisoners. And even that stat is wildly out of context. Wow, that is really sad. I am so sorry to hear that. He writes, quote, "A cross-comparison of statistics from the UK Ministry of Justice and UK Census shows that while almost 20% of male prisoners and a maximum of 3% of female prisoners have committed sex offenses, at least 41% of the trans-identifying prisoners were convicted of these crimes. Trans, then, appear to be twice as likely as natal males and at least 14 times as likely as natal females to be sex offenders." Then he says, transgender women are far more sexually predatory than biological women and somewhat more predatory than biological men. Okay? This is Hemant Mehta speaking again. Among the problems with those statistics, there are only a small number of trans women in prisons. It's a very tiny, very select sample size. There are actually fewer trans women in prison relative to their existence in the general population, an argument that suggests trans women as a whole are more law-abiding than cis people. It's also possible some of the sex offenses include getting arrested for consensual sex work. The 41% claim has been debunked here and here. Got a link to The Independent and BBC. None of that matters to Coyne, who uses the exact same logic that racists use when they claim black people commit more crimes because of who they are, instead of acknowledging our country's systemic biases against certain communities. There's more. In the same paragraph where Coyne insists he's not transphobic, he says trans people shouldn't be allowed to compete in women's sports, serve as counselors in women's shelters, or be placed in women's prisons. Like I said, this whole argument feels like the Satanic Panic to me. When I hear people talk about how they shouldn't be in sports, they shouldn't be in like women's prisons or shelters or whatever, all I'm hearing is these weird little edge cases where people are getting wrapped up in a ball in their own heads over nonsensical trash. It was bullshit in 1990 when they arrested the entire staff of a well, actually it was like 1983, I think, when they arrested the entire staff of a preschool or a daycare or whatever and sentenced the teachers and everybody to like multiple life sentences because a kid claimed that like they put a saddle on the kid's back and rode them around like a horse and that they like levitated above the ground. I'm not joking. That's 100% real. And there are people serving time right now, today, 30 years after their conviction for taking advantage of children that they never took advantage of. Like they're sitting in there now, counting their time. That's what I think when I hear this about the trans community. I'm not even going to feed into the argument. I'm not even going to give the argument or the thought experiment any credence. I'm not going to bother talking about whether they should be in shelters or in whatevers. You know why? It's not a problem. Literally nobody has complained about this except for like right-wing crybabies. Anyway, let's keep reading here. So it says, in the same paragraph where he insists he's not transphobic, he argues people shouldn't be allowed to compete in women's sports or be, counselors in shelters. Quote, transgender women, for example, should not compete athletically against biological women, should not serve as counselors and workers in battered women's shelters, or if convicted of a crime, should not be placed in a women's prison. Not going to bother giving it any credibility. It's a stupid fucking argument based on fear-mongering nonsense, and I'm not going to consider it any more than I considered the possibility that this person really did take advantage of a kid because they're a Satanist or something. The 80s was an awful decade. Yeah, it was. And for some people, it's the decade that keeps on giving to this day. This is Hemant Mehta speaking. Hard to imagine how a trans kid in high school wanting to play basketball impedes the legal and moral rights, quote unquote, of girls on the other teams. But if we're talking about sports, Coyne says very little about the processes by which the Olympics and the NCAA have thought through how to include trans athletes while maintaining the integrity of their sports. Interesting. Do they have a plan for this? It would surprise me if they didn't already. Let me see. The NCAA Board of Governors updates transgender participation policy. Wow, check that out. They already have a policy on it. How about that? In my experience up to this point, the sports organizations that handle qualifications and things have already come up with plans for this, and they're all pretty good. Like, who is it? The IOC that controls the Olympics qualifications and stuff. I think that they've been pretty good on their trans qualification stuff. Like, they don't say that trans people are disqualified from competing. You just have to basically have HRT for a certain period of time and a variety of other factors that guarantee that they are equal to everybody else in that category. I think we should just go with like what the sports organizations are saying at this moment. But again, that's me giving this argument credence by even acknowledging the argument in the first place. And I refuse to do that because it's just stupid. It's all stupid all the way down. Anyway, back to Hemant Mehta. It's downright bizarre. We haven't seen trans athletes winning every women's sport in which they can play. It's the rest of that passage that's even more disturbing, though. Coyne doesn't care whatsoever about the qualifications of trans counselors, but just flat out says they shouldn't be allowed to help women who've been abused because of his own prejudices. He also ignores the perils of putting trans women in male prisons, including the mental health impact it has on them. You can imagine how these talking points fuel all those bathroom bills promoted by Republicans in order to prevent trans children from just using the proper goddamn bathroom when they're out in public. The whole piece is nothing more than anti-trans bigotry wrapped up in a cloak of science. And it's barely wrapped up in a cloak of science, honestly. I expect that from Jerry Coyne because that's who he is. I expect it from Dawkins now, too. Me too, unfortunately. Somebody asked earlier, what about Michael Shermer? He's always been a piece of shit, sadly. He's done some really good debates. He's spread skepticism and everything really well, but he's always been off in La La Land. Shermer has. I hate to say it. I mean, like I said, you can appreciate what they've done and who they are without accepting the nonsense that comes along with it. All right, this is Hema Mehta again. I expect better from FFRF because they have a much better track record on these issues, and because they have a staff that personally cares about these issues, and because they know better than most just how far-reaching Christian nationalist legislation can be and how it uniquely impacts LGBTQ people. The American Humanist Association knows this too. In 2021, after Dawkins compared trans people to a woman who lied about her race, I remember that, the AHA retroactively withdrew the Humanist of the Year award they gave him in 1996. It was a purely symbolic gesture, but it received enormous attention. But the AHA felt that continuing to align themselves with a bigot flew in the face of their stated values, so they made a clean break. They deserved a hell of a lot of credit for that. Absolutely. 100% agree. Are Michael Shermer and CFI okay? I mean, it's okay to appreciate the work that they do outside of all the anti-trans. I will still read The God Delusion. I won't pay for it. I mean, I already paid for it, so it doesn't matter. But, you know, you got to recognize like how toxic and ridiculous their arguments are. It's no different than the Satanic Panic. No different. I can't believe that they don't see that. Let's continue. So, how did this happen, and how did FFRF respond, says Hema Mehta. Shortly after they posted Coyne's article, the backlash began with a number of activists and supporters expressing their frustration with the group for promoting this kind of hate. And yeah, this is straight up hate. I mean, I read through a little bit of the article, just a little bit, and from what I've seen, it's like really hateful trash. It's not like borderline, oh, well, it's just like an ideological discussion about blah, blah, blah. No, this is just hateful garbage. That's really sad. December 26th, what a Christmas present, huh? I guess it was only up for a day, I think. Evan Clark, executive director of Atheists United and a former guest on FFRF's radio show, said, quote, if you still support FFRF, I'd encourage you to pull your donations and talk to their leadership about the importance of trans rights in the battle against white Christian nationalism, end quote. David Williamson, co-founder of the Central Florida Free Thought Community and an invited speaker at an FFRF convention, said, quote, I wish FFRF would leave the unscientific anti-trans bigotry to the Center for Inquiry, end quote. Damn, I don't know anything about CFI, actually. I know somebody that, I think the vice president of American Atheists worked at CFI with Richard Dawkins for a while there. Debater Matt Dillahunty, who's also appeared at a number of FFRF events, said he'd soon make a video about this embarrassing garbage transphobic crap. Yeah, I watched that video. It was pretty good. I shared my own concerns on Blue Sky. Who knows how many members sent emails to the organization. This is embarrassing and sad. The FFRF posted an anti-trans screed from honorary board member Jerry Coyne. A disclaimer that it doesn't necessarily represent the group's views isn't a defense of posting bigotry. Wow. He looks exactly like my grandpa, actually. Like nearly spitting image. That's interesting. All right, let's continue. Whatever the reasons, the pressure worked. On Friday, FFRF removed Coyne's article from their website and posted a new one, signed by co-presidents Dan Barker and Annie Laurie Gaylor, expressing their explicit support for the LGBTQIA+ rights. Okay. After noting the direct harm Christian nationalists inflict upon the community, how their own membership includes plenty of LGBT people, and the various ways they've proudly supported the LGBTQ community and rights, and fought bigoted legislation, they brought up the elephant in the room. Quote, publishing this post was an error of judgment, and we've decided to remove it as it does not reflect our values or principles. We regret any distress caused by this post and are committed to ensuring it doesn't happen again. Moving forward, we're reviewing our content guidelines and internal processes to ensure our public messaging consistently reflects our values. We're committed to learning from this experience. Our mission to keep religion out of government is inextricably linked to preserving and advancing these fundamental rights. Interesting. And then Hemet Mehta says, it's not a bad response. They're not throwing anyone under the bus for publishing the piece. Yeah, I would love to know who the hell that was. Do they still work there is my question, and why? But they're acknowledging their mistake and putting it out under their name while pledging to do better. That's a good start. While they're at it, I suggest taking another look at their honorary board members. If you want my take on it, I don't think FFRF posted the article maliciously. I think they were surprised that someone like Coyne reached out asking to respond to a piece, felt obligated to post it in the name of open discussion, and didn't pay much attention to the underlying problems with his piece. An appropriate response... Yeah, I think I probably agree with that. They probably weren't even... Maybe they didn't even read it. I don't know. Maybe it was just like a rebuttal piece. Who knows? An appropriate response, then, involves taking down the piece, acknowledging their mistakes, and making sure this doesn't happen again in the future. That post, by the way, went out to the same email list that received Coyne's original piece. Wow. So FFRF has an email list, and those people received Coyne's email. That is really sad. That post, by the way, went out to the same email list that received Coyne's original piece. Yesterday, Coyne added... You know what? Here's a good thing about this situation. There's an Overton window. There's a window of acceptable public discourse, right? And right now, it's acceptable to talk about what Jerry Coyne said. You know, trans people aren't really the gender they identify as, whatever the hell it is. But in the atheist community, that is shot down nearly instantaneously. That is a good sign. The United States is going off in this wild direction right now, just out in la la land with how insane the political discourse is. But the atheist community is not accepting it. That's good. It's bad that this happened in the first place. It bodes ill that this article was posted to begin with. But the fact that it was shot down nearly instantaneously is a really good sign. The people aren't taking it. They're not putting up with it. Anyway, continuing on here. Yesterday, Coyne added an update on his website, which simply said, my article seems to have disappeared. That was presumably posted before FFRF's note went up. He posted a lengthier rant this morning, and surprise, he's pissed off. Oh my god, a lengthier rant, you say? The FFRF removed my piece on the biological definition of woman. Oh boy. Yeah, I don't want to read the whole thing, but let's... Wow, this is long, dude. This is crazy. It says, when I wrote yesterday about my critique of Kat Grant's What is a Woman piece, a critique published on the FFRF website, I had no idea what I wrote was being removed by FFRF at that moment. I'm not going into a long exegesis here, as I'll have more to say about this affair elsewhere, but here are the relevant links. When some readers pointed out yesterday that biology is not bigotry was no longer online, I had no idea what happened and assumed they'd relocated the post. I was unable to believe that they would actually remove my post, especially because FFRF co-president Annie Laurie Gaylor had given me permission to write it. Oh my god! And holy he called her out. Gaylor was the one that did it. She was the one that gave it the green check mark. I emailed her inquiring what had happened to my piece. I never got a response, or rather, they didn't have the human decency to write me back personally. Okay. They still have not done so, and now they shouldn't bother. And well, talk about human decency, huh? This guy is so concerned about human decency. Okay, go on. They still have not done so, and now they shouldn't bother. Instead, they sent out the following notice to all FFRF members. It's also archived here. What's this? Free thought now. God, like, the atheist community has such a weird, intertwined, winding little network of, like, websites and forums. Fascinating. Like, God, I want to read all of this so bad, but it's so long. I'm just looking through here. Note that first, when they refer to my piece, they mention neither who wrote the piece nor what it was about. If I'm to be canceled for what I wrote, damn it, I want my name and topic mentioned. Several things are clear, including a point I've made before. The FFRF has a remarkable ability to place any kind of anti-woke ideology under the rubric of Christian nationalism. That's why I wrote in my now expunged piece, as a liberal atheist, I'm about as far from Christian nationalism as one can get. Oh, that makes it true then. Absolutely. If he wrote it in there, then it's true. We know. And of course, I support LGBTQIA plus rights, save in those few cases where those rights conflict with the rights of other groups, as in sports participation. I doubt that even the FFRF would think that women should be boxing professionally or in the Olympics against men or biological men who identify as women. Bro, that's not happening. That whole thing is fictitious, okay? That didn't happen. What he just said is made up bullshit from Republicans. This is, once again, the satanic panic making a comeback. It's this all over again.
Exerts a tremendous amount of energy that the people there can sort of vampirize on, and so animals would be slain, and this is especially true on the high holidays like Beltane and Samhain, Halloween and May Eve.
There's something about sacrifice. If you do it once, you want to do it all the time. Once you've actually passed the barrier of sacrificing an animal, you get this sort of bloodlust where you really want to do it. And I really wanted to do it.
It's bullshit, okay? It's bullshit. How did you fall for this? You're supposed to be a skeptic. What happened? Are you really that big of a sucker that you fell for this bullshit propagandistic Republican nonsense? Why are you even an atheist? How did you get here? I don't understand. I doubt that even the FFRF would think a woman should be boxing professionally or in the Olympics against men. They're not. They are not. This is not an issue that exists in reality. I don't understand how this happened. Anyway, back to what old Jerry Coyne was saying here, but it's the last 6 paragraphs of FFRF's post where they explain why they took down my piece. It's because it caused distress and did not reflect FFRF's true values or principles. I'm not sure what values or principles my piece failed to reflect. Well, I'll tell you what's going on here. Your piece reflects the values of Christian nationalists crying about Satanism around every corner and people sacrificing animals to Baphomet or some stupid. That's what it reads like. It's that. Does the FFRF think that sex is really a spectrum? No! No! People don't think that. We're talking about gender, okay? Not sex. And aside from that, sex is actually a spectrum. But gender is what we're discussing. They are different. Do they think it's a spectrum and that there are more than 2 sexes in humans, or that the most useful definition of biological sex doesn't involve gamete size? I don't know, nor do they say. That has nothing to do with anything at all. It's completely unrelated to anything. We're talking about the fact that Republicans are running this multi-billion-dollar propaganda machine against a minority group, and you are feeding it for free. You are giving them your time and energy and clout by writing this stupid that affects literally nobody and demonizing even further a minority group that doesn't need any more of it. That's the issue here. Like again, it's just like the satanic panic. It's just bullshit all the way down. I feel like I should. Oh, this is his article. This is the whole article, I think. I feel kind of obligated to go through this article of his since we're talking about it. I feel like it's going to take us a couple of minutes, but it'll be worth our time to go through it. So we're going to hit that again in a second. Let's just finish Hemant Mehta's thing here, and then we'll finish Jerry Coyne's thing. Hemant Mehta continues on. Coyne also implies FFRF knew this would be controversial, which is why he says a disclaimer was added to the piece. Was it just a coincidence that it happened to be the first person to receive it? Make of this disclaimer what you will, but I find it a remarkable coincidence that the appearance of disclaimers just happens to accompany the publication of an article discussing the definition of woman. Are you kidding me? Of course. Did you not realize this is a controversial thing that you're saying right now? Is this the first you're hearing of it? You think this is like a completely normal conversation that like anybody's having, that there's literally zero offense that could possibly be taken, even out of context, by anybody? Am I not supposed to feel picked on as the recipient of the very first disclaimer, says Jerry. Hemant Mehta says, I can answer that for you. Yes, it's a coincidence. He wasn't being picked on. An FFRF source told me the disclaimer policy was already in the works before Coyne's article was published. Oh, how about that? It was a coincidence. But it is a controversial subject. So it would make complete sense if they put a disclaimer on. That's really funny, actually. Wow. But even without a disclaimer, it seems FFRF knew this article had problems, but they decided posting Coyne's article outweighed any backlash they might get for doing it. That assessment was quickly proven wrong. This is one big problem I have here. I don't care about the backlash. Who cares about the backlash? What I care about is the fact that they are enabling, or, God, there's a word here. What's the word? They are facilitating further persecution and demonization of a minority group that does not deserve it, that did nothing to anybody. They're facilitating that. That's my problem. When I was writing a draft of this article yesterday, says Hemant Mehta, I predicted that Coyne was going to pretend to be a victim of free speech, of cancel culture, of science denialism, etc. Indeed, this morning he went down the science denialism route. Of course he did. This is from Coyne. It is only fear that would make an organization take down a rational discussion of such a contentious statement. I don't know what the FFRF is afraid of, but I am just a biologist defending my turf, and I'm not by any means bent on hurting LGBTAIA plus people. What the hell is that? LGBTAIA plus. Okay. The things that he said in the article were incorrect, factually incorrect. Just in the bit about trans people being predators alone, that was factually incorrect. And this is a very sensitive subject, and it's targeted toward minorities. So it seems to me that if you know your article is going to target a minority group that is being persecuted actively right now, it is incumbent upon you to make sure that you come factually correct. He clearly came with a bias in mind. He started from a conclusion and worked backward. This isn't a scholarly article by any stretch of the imagination. Nobody could possibly interpret it that way. He came in swinging and hurt people and is now crying that his article was taken down. Coyne sounds like Republican policymakers who insist nothing they do can be categorized as racist because they don't walk around wearing a white hood. Coyne doesn't get to be the arbiter of whether his posts hurt people. The people in that community do, and they've been saying for years how they think this kind of rhetoric hurts them. And then, as I also predicted, he claimed to be censored. When they start censoring my words because, though biologically justifiable, they are ideologically unpalatable, that is just too much. All I can say now is this is not the end of this kerfuffle, and that I stand by what I wrote before. No one owes him a platform, including FFRF, and someone who claims to care about facts and critical thinking should figure out why he's so easily duped by right-wing propagandists anytime the topic involves trans people. Yeah, like I said, this is exactly the same style of propaganda that comes out of the right wing about atheists and gay people and every other subject out there. I cannot believe that he fell for it with this one specific thing. By the way, I asked Kat Grant what they made of this whole kerfuffle, since it was their essay that made Coyne so mad. Grant focused on the response rather than how the piece was published, and wanted to assure people that FFRF was still worth supporting. This is Grant. I know for a fact the entire staff is already working hard to regain the trust that has been lost as a result of this, including myself. I know the organization will grow to be stronger on the other side of this. So that's respectable, and I appreciate that. Unfortunately, I don't like FFRF for other reasons right now, but yeah. I think you should support American Atheists instead. That's just me. I'm biased. One more related thing. My friend Drew McCoy, who has a large YouTube following as genetically modified skeptic, was recently invited to speak with Richard Dawkins to help him promote his new science book. That's interesting. Did not know that. That may have meant appearing on stage with him as a part of his recent book tour, but Drew said no because of Dawkins' repeated anti-trans statements. While he might have been open to directly challenging Dawkins on his comments on stage, this is a promotional tour for Dawkins, not a debate, so appearing on stage with him would be seen as an endorsement of Dawkins himself. Furthermore, trans rights shouldn't be up for debate, and it's ridiculous to pretend people can just politely agree to disagree about human rights. Absolutely agree on that. I spoke with Drew about the decision, why I believe it's the right one, and he made a video about it. I hope you consider watching it. That's fascinating. I had no idea that Drew was invited.
Dawkins is in there right now, getting ready to deliver one of his last public speeches in the U.S. ever. I could be in there right now, maybe even on stage with him, but instead, I'm just out here. Let me tell you why. All the way back.
Hard respect. That's good. I'm going to watch that later. Yeah, I'll come back to that. I'm going to message him later, too. Anyway, that's the end of Hemant Mehta's article. That's really interesting. Now, let's just finish up Jerry Coyne's fest about why he's being canceled by the wokeists or whatever. He says, it's the last 6 paragraphs of FFRF's post where they explain why they took down my piece. It's because it caused distress and did not reflect FFRF's values or principles. I'm not sure what values or principles my piece failed to reflect. Brother, it's not about the values and or principles that you failed to reflect. It's about the ones that you did reflect that they don't want. That is such a basic, straightforward, logical, faceplant that I just can't stand it. Does the FFRF think that sex is really a spectrum, that there are more than 2 sexes in humans, or that the most useful definition of biological sex doesn't involve gamete size? I don't know, nor do they say. Right. There are 2 sexes in humans, and there are exceptions to that. I don't think that nobody disagrees with that. We're talking about gender here, transgender. As for my words causing distress, well, I'm sorry if people feel distress when I explicate the biological definition of sex or estimate how few people fail to adhere to the sex binary. I think that's his problem. He believes that we're talking about the sex binary. We're not. We're talking about the mental expression or the mental understanding of their identity. But this is all material not for censorship, but for back and forth discussion, especially on a site called Free Thought Now. Should it be called Free Thought Not instead? And that is what disappoints me most. Not just the mission creep, wow, that's a word I don't hear very often. Not just a mission creep instantiated by the FFRF's incursion into partisan politics or dubious ideology. Bro, that's the thing. You are getting into partisan politics. They removed it from their website. I guess Grant, whoever it is, Cat Grant or Grant Cat or whatever, they posted something about trans rights on there. But this it didn't seem to be a rebuttal piece to that. It seemed to be just a fire hose of right-wing propaganda from Jerry Coyne. Incursion into partisan politics or dubious ideology, but the fact that they will not allow free and civil discussion about an article that they published, an article that concludes by saying a woman is whoever she says she is. Well, they are. I mean, there's a comment section where they can discuss it freely. If that's not a statement ripe for discussion, then what is? It is only fear that would make an organization take down a rational discussion of such a contentious statement. I don't know what the FFRF is afraid of, but I'm just a biologist defending my turf, and I'm not by any means bent on hurting the AIA plus people. Okay. I'm distressed that it's come to this, as I've always been a big supporter of FFRF and its historical mission, which is, I suppose, why they made me an honorary director and gave me the Emperor Has No Clothes award. And I will always support their activities that genuinely try to keep church and state separate. But when they start censoring my words, you don't have a right to their platform. When they start censoring my words because, though biologically justifiable, they are ideologically unpalatable, that's just too much. And it's just not the end of the kerfuffle, he says. Okay. I'll love to see where it goes from here. How sad is it that one of the nation's premier organizations promoting free thought won't permit that kind of thought on their website, but instead quashes what they see as wrongthink? Did they call it wrongthink? Is that the word they used? That's the word I saw that you used. I didn't see them use that term. All right, so I guess this is the article. It's pretty long. I don't think I want to read the whole thing, but let's just kind of glance through.
In the Free Thought Now article, What is a Woman?, author Cat Grant struggles at length to define the word, rejecting one definition after another as flawed or incomplete. Grant finally settles on a definition based on self-identity. A woman is whoever she says she is. This, of course, is a tautology, and still leaves open the question of what a woman really is.
It would be a tautology if it wasn't an identity. It's an identity that people, what is a Christian? A Christian is whatever a Christian says that a Christian is. A Christian defines what a Christian is because Christians are Christian. It's a self-ascribed label. I'm a schmoobly-gong. I'll tell you what a schmoobly-gong is.
Grant finally settles on a definition based on self-identity. A woman is whoever she says she is. This, of course, is a tautology and still leaves open the question of what a woman really is. And the remarkable redefinition of a term with a long biological history can be seen only as an attempt to force ideology onto nature. Because some non-binary people or men who identify as women, trans women, feel that their identity is not adequately recognized by biology, they choose to impose ideology onto biology and concoct a new definition of woman.
Yeah, so he's mixing up like gender and sex all through here. Intentionally, unintentionally, I don't know.
Further, there are plenty of problems with the claim that self-identification maps directly onto empirical reality. You are not always fat if you feel fat. The problem with anorexia, not a horse if you feel you're a horse. A class of people called Therians psychologically identify as animals. And do not become Asian, simply become you feel Asian. The issue of transracialism.
Okay, look, nobody is saying that. No one says, I believe that I'm a woman, so henceforth I am going to believe that I was born with the gametes of a female human or whatever. Nobody is rewriting reality or whatever. Claiming that you're a horse in a human body is not the same in any way, because horse is not an identity. I am an atheist. That's an identity. I will tell you what an atheist is to me.
But sex, Grant tells us, is different. It is the one biological...
No. Gender. He's mixing them up. Sex is the physical representation and can be empirically measured. Gender is the mental expression.
But sex, Grant tells us, is different. It is the one biological feature of humans that can be changed solely by psychology. But why should sex be changeable while other physical traits cannot?
Nobody said that.
But why should sex be changeable while other physical traits cannot? Feelings don't create reality. Instead, in biology, sex is traditionally defined by the size and mobility of reproductive cells, gametes. Males have small, mobile gametes, sperm in animals and pollen in plants.
Yeah, that's correct. This is all correct.
Males have small, mobile gametes, sperm in animals and pollen in plants. Females have large, immobile gametes, ova in plants and eggs in animals. In all animals and vascular plants there are exactly 2 sexes and no more. Though a fair number of plants and a few species of animals combine both functions in a single individual, hermaphrodites, these are not a third sex because they produce the typical 2 gametes.
Right. So does he think that trans people believe that they now have immobile gametes once they identify as trans? I don't understand. Is that what he's saying? I think that's what he believes.
It's important to recognize that, although this gametic idea is called a definition of sex, it is really a generalization and thus a concept based on a vast number of observations of diverse organisms. We know that, except for a few algae and fungi, all multicellular organisms and vertebrates, including us, adhere to this generalization. It is, then, nearly universal. Besides its universality, the gametic concept has utility, for it is the distinction between gamete types that explains evolutionary phenomena like sexual selection. Differential investment in reproduction accounts for the many differences, both physical and behavioral, between males and females. No other concept of sex has such universality and utility. Attempts to define sex by combining various traits associated with gamete type, like chromosomes, genitalia, hormones, body hair, and so on, lead to messy and confusing multivariate models that lack both the universality and explanatory power of the gametic concept.
Gametic. And yeah, nobody is saying that. Nobody is saying that they now believe that they have always produced like the immobile gametes matching, or nobody's saying that now that they are trans women, they have always produced immobile gametes. No one is saying that. Nobody has ever said that. Where did he get any of this? It's like he's completely ignoring the psychological facts of the matter and allowing that to open a door into Republican propaganda. That's really sad.
Yes, there is a tiny fraction of exceptions, including intersex individuals, who defy classification. Estimates range between 1,5,600 and 120,000. These exceptions to the gametic view are surely interesting, but do not undermine the generality of the sex binary.
Nobody said that. Nobody is arguing that.
Nowhere else in biology would deviations this rare undermine a fundamental concept. To illustrate, as many as 1 in 300 people are born with some form of polydactyly without the normal number of 10 fingers. Nevertheless, nobody talks about a spectrum of digit number.
Like, he is arguing with a ghost. Like, nobody said any of this.
Nevertheless, nobody talks about a spectrum of digit number. It's important to recognize that only a very few non-binary and transgender people are intersex, for nearly all are biologically male or female.
Well, for what it's worth, that is a spectrum of digits, though, right? I mean, there is a spectrum of digits that you can have. Just, I mean, if we're getting real technical and specific here, which we obviously are.
In biology, then, a woman can be simply defined in 4 words, an adult human female.
Matt Dillahunty aptly pointed out that this is a tautology. Like, he committed the same fallacies that he accused Grant of perpetrating here. But just saying adult human female tells me exactly what I need to know about him. He's lifted this right out of Republican propaganda. That's it. It came straight out of Republican mouths. And we're talking, like, let me rephrase. It came out of the mouths of Christian nationalists, or most specifically, the actual playbook of Christian nationalists. Like, the plan to strip people of their rights. It came from that playbook.
Dismissal of trait-based concepts of sex leads to serious errors and misconceptions. I mention only a few. The biological concept of a woman does not, as Grant argues, depend on whether she can actually produce eggs.
Oh my God, dude. All right. I ran out of my free time to read this. Well, anyway, it seems like it goes on like that. The point that I think he's getting to, the crux of the issue, is that he's confusing sex and gender, not realizing that, like, there's a psychological aspect to this. And he seems to believe that, like, trans people believe that they have always produced a different gamete than they have previously from the moment they accept that they're trans. So does he believe that, like, trans people are not real? Do you think that they have a mental illness? Does he think that they... What? I don't know. I don't know what he thinks. I don't understand. That's really sad. And you know what else is sad? The fact that he pointed out for us so considerately that it was Annie Laurie Gaylor that gave him the permission. Co-president Annie Laurie Gaylor. I'm really sorry to hear that. Anyway, let me know what you think about it in the comments. That's really interesting.